So hello, everyone, and welcome to Breana Ferreira's Artist in Resident Opening Artist Talk. I'm Nathan Stanfield, the studio manager here at the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Southern California. AMOCA champions the art, history, creation, and technology of ceramics through exhibitions, collections, outreach, and studio programming. Today's Artist Talk focuses on the work of Breana Ferreira, who recently started her residency in the AMOCA studio. AMOCA's Artist in Resident program, established in 2012, is one of the few long-term fellowship opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. Our residency program, which provides artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work, is funded through the generous support from Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay, and the Wingate Foundation. The next call for residency applications will be in January 2023. Today, Breana will be sharing some of her work and talking about her plans for her time as an artist in resident at AMOCA. Also joining us today are AMOCA's Executive Director, Beth Ann Gerstein, our Exhibitions Manager, Pam Aliaga, who both have been instrumental in supporting and championing ceramic artists and growing our artist in resident program. Now I'm excited to tell you a little bit more before getting started about Breana Ferreira. Breana is an emerging studio artist currently working with clay at the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Pomona, California, as a long-term artist in resident. Ferreira was born and raised here in Southern California and received her BFA in ceramics at the University of North Texas as a first-generation graduate. She has been actively engaged in the competitive ceramics community, achieving awards through the NCECA Skutt Student Competitions and recognition from organizations and exhibitions such as the Strictly Functional Pottery National Exhibition, the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and the Artstream Nomadic Gallery. Her practice revolves around a desire to understand the self as a creature of comfort and a product of its environment. In drawing directly from aspects of her environments that evoke curiosity, she crafts objects as mementos that reflect on the significance of everyday life. Ferreira is the artist in residence at AMOCA from September of this year until August of 2023. Before Breana starts her presentation, I want to remind everyone this talk is being recorded and to please mute yourself. There will be an opportunity at the end for Q&A, and I will now turn the presentation over to Breana.
Thank you. Good job with the last name. Proud. Thank you all for coming. Of course, thank you to the AMOCA staff. Since I've been here, there's just been so much hard work and kindness constantly. Thank you to Laguna Clay and the Armstrong family, who I was so excited to have met recently. Wingate Foundation. Thank you to my family, my professors, everyone who got me here. I am going to get started and share this screen. And this talk is going to really primarily take place in like the evolution throughout my undergraduate career, because I've only been working in clay for about 4 years. So a lot of what's happened has happened during undergraduate. And from there, I came straight here. So like Nathan mentioned, I am originally from Southern California, actually from Riverside, only like 20 miles away from here. So that's pretty wild. It felt very full circle. When I was around 13, we moved to Texas, primarily like in the Austin area. Kind of, yeah, we jumped around sometimes, but in that general area. And when I came to Texas and went to high school, I got involved in FFA. And if you don't know what that is, that's Future Farmers of America. And I raised goats and I was on the entomology team. So I've always had an interest in bugs and animals and whatnot. And I became involved with the art club, of course. I was a president at some point. And this is the only ceramic object I remember making. It was a functional object, but lean, very sculptural. This is not the beginning of like my clay romance by any means. It just is like something I made in high school that I happen to have a photo of. After high school, I moved to Denton, Texas, to pursue higher education at the University of North Texas. And here I have this like timeline at the bottom. It looks kind of crazy, but I thought it would help with like keeping track of the chronological order of things as I talk through this. But when I came to UNT and had to select a major, I selected a visual arts studies major, specifically because I knew I wanted to graduate in art education. I just didn't exactly know what field I wanted to major in. And this program was specifically designed so that you got a little taste of every studio art that the school had to offer. So in the beginning, I started with a lot of two-dimensional work, which is where I seemed to thrive in the beginning. And this was when I was introduced to my first clay course, which is a beginning throwing course. And I was just the most furious thrower you could probably imagine. I was so angry. It was by far the most challenging thing I had ever done. And I, at the time, felt that I was very like naturally artistic. I was very confident for the most part in that area. So it stuck with me, especially that first year, just how challenging it was. But I continued as this VAS major, and I got much better at drawing and painting. And then I got to play a little bit more in the three-dimensional world, specifically with sculpture, working with different types of material. And this is when I got introduced to printmaking as well. I was never in a screen printing class. It's very much a part of my current practice, but it was one of those classes in college that was always booked. Everyone wanted to make their own t-shirt. So there was no one ever there was no space ever. So I worked primarily with litho printing and mono printing. And I kind of always had, whether it was drawing and painting or sculpture or printing, I always had like half a body of work that was really colorful and kind of maximalist, with a lot of layering and text. And then another body of work that tended to just be using, often like black and white and just working with line and movement. This piece to the right, this wooden piece, was the beginning of my bad habit of trashing all my work because I was not happy with a lot of stuff when it came, when it was completed. But this was the first piece where I ended up creating an object solely off of scraps, which is something that I'm currently doing in my studio now. This is what the ceramic work looked like at the time. After that first course, I then took a beginning hand building course, and because these were beginning level courses, we were required to high fire reduction with this pretty gray stoneware. And, Chino had my heart from the beginning. I loved Chinos. I loved sgraffito. I loved toasty pots. And despite the fact that everything remained pretty functional, a lot of it was designed with a very specific function, and some of it ended up leaning sculptural from time to time. And often, had evidence of me playing around with trying to apply all of the techniques I learned as a drawing and painting student to clay and that process. In 2019, I became a ceramics major. And at that time, I was really torn between printmaking and ceramics. And we had a grad student named Lindy, and she was printing on clay. And when I saw that that was possible, I knew that clay was the way for me to go, because it seemed like there were endless possibilities. And not only was I going to always learn from this, it was going to frustrate the hell out of me. It was going to challenge me constantly. It was going to humble me in moments when I probably needed humbling. It's something that I really wanted to adopt in my life. And when I get interested in something, I am a bit obsessive, and I'm like 100% there. So I immediately hit the books, and this is where I started documenting really anything that I was attracted to in terms of ceramics, and not really questioning why, just having those photos so that later when I wanted to analyze these things, I could look back and try to find connections and identify what it is I'm really attracted to. That this is just where my brain went initially. I wanted to look at historical pots, and I was attracted to functional form and volume and decoration, and especially texture. I got introduced to underglazes. Now, despite being told that not all underglazes go to cone 10 and in reduction, I refused to believe that unless I did all the tests. So this is where I began testing like a mad woman, which is something I do usually all the time. And this pot at the bottom right is one of the first forms, like larger forms that I threw successfully. It was so heavy and it ended up blowing up, but it's the first example of me making a functional form that has a very specific function and has a decoration that directly relates it to its function. And that's not something that I was super strategic about. It felt necessary. It was like more of like an urgency. Like it had to be the decoration had to connect to the function, or it was simply just a pretty object. So this is something that continues over and over again, and I obsess over like the crazy person sometimes. And I get so caught up in symbolism and meaning. So I'm excited. This is all new, and just for to be the cherry on top, I get involved with Clay Guild, and right in time for Giselle Hicks and Liz Lurie to come speak to our guild, which was so enlightening and exciting and amazing. I got to see two very different women show very different techniques and talk not only about the craft, but about what it is like to live a life that is dedicated to craft, and what it's like to be a woman in the field and to do this for, your living. And it was perfectly correlated with DPI that year, which was the first time I had attended that. And my professor at the time, Brooks Oliver, he was, he's heavily involved in that. And so he was able to get the students to attend this. And yeah, Brooks Oliver, that's a whole nother story. I mean, he's been with me since the very first clay class. So throughout this entire presentation, Brooks Oliver has been in my life, like helping me and pushing me. He's always been like a very crucial presence. I also, see, this is like a jam-packed year. This year was great. I also get to do a wood firing, which I didn't even know what that was until Liz Lurie was speaking about it. And I'm so impatient and pretty small, so I'm able to like snag some people's pots out of there when it starts to cool down a little bit. I think I like got my bangs a little sizzled, but it was so worth it because I pulled out this pot that got me so excited because of the fact that I was super into toasty pots. I loved to kind of treat wood ash and oxide like it was glitter. I just wanted to just sprinkle it on everything. So this pot, this little mug, it was it was unbelievably uncomfortable, which is horrible to think about right now, but it was beautiful. I loved it. And this is kind of what the work looked at around that time. So it was a mix between soda-fired work, wood-fired work, and towards the end, I tried to fire that clay body in oxidation so that I could get kind of a brighter surface. So I got to get a little bit of taste of what that would look like in terms of using like a brighter glaze, getting that nice pink red, and actually getting some like results from the underglaze that like survived, like that yellow survived, which was kind of a miracle. But this cactus, what looks like a sculpture, is actually has two very specific functions. It's a candelabra at night, and then you take those little bowls out and it becomes a vase. If you were to flip that guy over, he is completely destroyed on the other side. So this is his pretty side. When it was loaded in the soda kiln, there was just like a horrible accident and it got completely destroyed, but it looks great from this side. So, and here's some more images of me playing with pattern and lots of texture and line and stamping. During the break, I hated that I couldn't work with clay, so I just started to always think about it and try to implement it into my breaks by just really paying attention to the things that I was collecting and the things that I was attracted to in my everyday environments. So I was looking at forms that I enjoyed in antique shops and objects that I collected. I come from a family of collectors, so I have tons of random knickknacks and things. And then I discovered the work of Grayson Perry, who, if you don't know him, you should definitely know him. His work is incredible. And just looking at this collection of photos, it was very clear that I was layering, and oh, I'm having some sound issues. I think we're good. And a lot of a maximalist approach. Like I just wanted to overwhelm an object with just like chaos. I just wanted it to be really crazy. And at this point, I've worked with clay a little bit enough to feel confident in finally stepping into marrying clay with printmaking, but not confident enough to jump straight into screen printing. So I started to do my research, and I found this really old video that Ceramics Art Network posted on YouTube in 2016 of a photolithography technique using mason stain and a couple of other like weird gums and things. So when I got back into the studio, I was able to successfully create this technique. And at this point, I'm becoming a bit more of like of an intermediate student. So I have some freedom in terms of clay body. So I already start formulating a trio of clay bodies, which ends up being a reoccurring theme, wanting this, what I consider to be like colors of construction. So you have like, I was always wanting a brick red, maybe like a concrete gray, and like an asphalt black. Like I wanted these colors that I was seeing in areas of construction. And I am not tech savvy. So I took the like old school collage approach when it came to creating the collages for the printing technique. And at this point, I realized that the only colors that were going to survive in high fire reduction were going to be black, red, and blue. So that's kind of what I worked with. But this is where I started to play a lot with it doesn't look very maximalist, but like I was really applying every single technique I was interested in one object. I wanted to play with slip and movement and wax resist and stamping and texture. I wanted to dip my toe into slab construction. I wanted to play with everything. And I was obsessed with this idea that, there's a certain amount of hours of work that you do before you master something. And I was like, if I just work really hard, I'll learn as much as I can as fast as possible. And I was just really engaged in that idea. And in being so involved, I wanted to be as involved as possible. I wanted to really get involved with the guild and how that worked. And I wanted to see what the community thought of our work. I wanted to hear everything. I wanted to hear the stereotypes. I wanted to hear just the general reactions and try to figure out ways. How could we market a little bit better? How could we do things to get people engaged and get them to understand and appreciate the process behind all of this? And then I wanted to know what it took to run a studio like this that made it possible. I wanted to know what was happening in the back of the kitchen, behind the curtains, and I wanted to really get pretty dirty in that way. And it was a lot of labor, but in doing that, and being a studio technician assistant for that school's studio, I had like the honor of working under a studio technician named Valerie Hancock, who was incredibly good at her job, very intense, kept a really great studio. And it taught me a lot about organization and cleanliness and how to delegate. And I realized that honestly, if I can get dirty like this and do all this labor and still love this, then it is for sure for me. This is what that work ended up looking like. I started playing with luster and playing with nichrome wire and coins and cork. I made like a wooden box. I made little magnets. I really was just like playing around and making a ton of functional things. And after my experience with Clay Guild, I realized that I could do something like that on my own. So I was able to create and coordinate this fun event that we ended up calling the Pottery Pop-Up with the help of my friend, Christina Lovefold, who I went to school with. And we created an event for undergraduate and graduate ceramic students to sell their work to the public through this coffee shop and keep like 98% of the profits. And it was like hugely successful. And I loved everything from sending the emails and printing out the posters and doing the advertising. And so it helped me realize that, I want to be a maker. I want to be part of technician and communication and marketing. I was realizing that I was loving every aspect of this community, and I wanted to be as useful as possible in this community. So all of these things and all of the things that come after this are me really trying to build my toolbox so that I can contribute to this community in any area, hopefully, and hopefully do it well. When I get back to the studio, I become introduced to the building techniques of Sarah Pike, Sunshine Cobb, and Bertie Boone. And they have a really unique way of building, a lot of like pinching and slab building, lots of stamping and utilizing molds to provide support. And this really helps me create objects that are achieving that sense of volume and are giving an impatient person like me like instant gratification that I need. And at this point, I also am starting to take a surface and ornamentation course, and I'm inching away from cone 10. But of course, someone like me, I can't go from cone 10 to cone 6. So I go to cone 8 and I stay at cone 8 for like much too long. And I formulate this really finicky clay body that I just apparently take as a challenge when I could have just gotten rid of it. And I decide, okay, underglazes aren't working. Maybe the mason stains will be more like potent at cone 8. So I play with that. I start working with construction, like responding to form as if they are registers for decoration, very similar to like a lot of historical pots. And I just start playing a lot with different types of form and playing in between slab building and pinching and pushing and pulling, both forms of building. And then of course COVID hits, and I am in denial. And I am thinking to myself, I am going to make a home studio. I'm just gonna make a small one, and I'm gonna keep building because I can't not do this or I'm gonna go a little crazy. So I build this little home studio, and I use this what is a very considerate time. I think everyone is not expecting too much of the students. It was a really scary time, but if you could work with clay, it was encouraged. So I started playing with all the things that I have wanted to continue to develop. So I started thinking about different types of handles, alternative handles, just form in general, maybe turning a handle into a decorative appendage and seeing how that appendage would function, taking a form and then deciding to recreate it and bisect it to create two pieces that come to one. Just using the opportunity to play, because I think in moments of play in the studio, it is the most educational, but quite often you don't always have like physical objects to show for it. You just have a lot of knowledge and a lot of like failed prototypes. So it's a little hard to swallow sometimes, but this was a good opportunity for me to play a bit. And it presented me with a unique challenge. This is the first time I participated in a competition. This was the first NCECA Skutt Student Competition. And, I have a habit of playing it pretty safe in the studio. So my evolution is a little slow. I can be a little scared sometimes of change. So these specific competitions presented really unique opportunities for me to do something totally outside of my wheelhouse. So in applying for this competition, I decided to make something like pretty large and sculptural. When that got accepted, I had a new challenge to make like a sweater, which was bizarre, and I had to do it in like 30 minutes. And I had to like record myself doing it. It was really intense, but it like really got my gears turning. It was very exciting. And then I got to create a separate little body of work to submit. And I ended up winning that competition, which kind of felt like positively reinforcing this way of play and stepping out of my comfort zone, which I think I needed a little bit. So COVID has happened. the semester has finished off and now we're entering summer. And I just so happened to pop into a studio in Fort Worth, a very small production pottery studio. And I think it was just a beautiful coincidence that I was curious about her clay body and she was looking for an employee. So I said yes, and this is the studio of Kendall Davis Clay. This was the shop that we started off in, and I end up being with her all the way until I leave Texas. So this is the beginning of a 2-year-long relationship. I start off as a thrower and a hand builder. Not a good thrower, I'll tell you right now. I was not. It was incredible that she hired me because I knew like the fundamentals, but it was really amazing to see how fast I grew as a thrower in just like 6 months. And I think this confidence ends up contributing to the thrown elements to my current process, because my current process, it requires both thrown objects and hand building techniques. So, and here, oh my gosh, I may have started off as just, you know, a builder. I was hand building and throwing, but I very quickly get involved in teaching opportunities there. I learned how to communicate with designers to create products. You know, in a situation where you need someone who understands the material to create a product within a budget. I learned how to be a studio technician for a small studio. I learned how to move a studio 2 times. It was intense. So this was, I mean, she was gracious enough to like give me all of this control. I'm naturally a very controlling person, but she did not have to like give into that. She was very generous with all of her time and energy and all of these opportunities. So I note this here because I think the production pottery world ends up leading me into a bit of a spiral, which we will talk about right now. When we get back into the studio after COVID, I have like just a world of ideas and I want to make like crazy. I just feel like I have to play catch up. And the two projects I start working on are like really heavy in terms of meaning, which is not what my work was previously. Like these are fertility urns, and at the bottom, these are like diner mugs that comment on like consumption. Like things just get really heavy because I feel like I have a lot to say, and there has not been much socializing. So I jump right in, and these end up being pots that are like physically very large, and I try new techniques with every project. I think it's an opportunity. Each project is a test in itself. So I test out a bunch of new techniques, using on-gobes instead of slips, staining with different colors, trying to create movement within form and surface, testing out new printing techniques. And this is kind of what my planning looks like always. It's a little crazy looking, but being someone who really likes to layer, I need to plan out each layer and how each layer is going to occur. So I usually do this in the beginning, and I like to think of it as creating some kind of general plan and doing what I need to do to create a toolbox, which ends up kind of establishing parameters for me to play within. It's like my safe way of having fun so that I can maybe guarantee something that's successful. It doesn't feel so high risk to me. It feels like I have a little bit of control. So this is, what the preparation for transferring looks like. So I'm just hand painting, kind of like filling in the color, like number by color, and creating patterns. Now, I look at this work and I love it now. But when this came out of the kiln, I was furious. I was so mad. It was crazy how mad I was. I hated how brown the pots were. My brain thought cone 8 would be something like cone 5, and it was not. I didn't like how the surface of the colors was like scabbing and flaking off. I had never worked with porcelain before. I didn't really know fully what to expect. But despite loving this work now, at the time, this is what pushes me, pushes me into anger and towards cone 6. So this is the transition. This is when I enter essentially what is the beginning of my current body of work, where I decide I feel like, oh my gosh, I've wasted all this time on this group of pots. They turned out terrible. They're cone 8. I'm done with high fire. So in full force, I jump into formulating a new clay body, which is like a very simple clay body, very basic, and it looks beautiful at cone 6 and 5. I do tons of glaze tests. I make a variety of molds, and I do a variety of sketches. And so this image, this like collection of 4 images, is really the general idea of what to think when I say, like, I'm creating a toolbox. So I try to make a variety so that I can then play within that. And so because I'm like at cone 6, I'm all excited because everyone's telling me I can achieve all this crazy color. So I start hitting, my own books, and I'm looking at all the images that I've collected over like the past 3 years of anything that I've saved simply because I enjoyed the color. And so I'm presented with a lot of different patterns and textures and sources. So I'm looking at bugs and nature. I'm looking at textiles and painters, medical illustrations, microscopic images. And the overall theme that I can see at this point is a lot of it's a warm color palette. And I end up deciding that I'm going to start with like the color palette of a mango, essentially. So I select these 3 colors from my glaze tests. And from there, I jump into form. So these things are kind of happening simultaneously, but usually I begin with all of the testing and then slowly ease into form. So I'm really just practicing. And I think the production potter mode is in me here because I start just like frantically making, like making a sea of objects. It gets a little much. Like, this is where I discover that I am not a balanced individual. I will stay in the studio and I will not eat that much. I will eat Cheez-Its and I will sleep for 3 hours. And if you let me, that's what I'll do. So this was a very good learning moment. So I think I had to go through that to realize the changes I needed to make. But it wasn't until this point where I started photographing mistakes. And I started photographing little moments that were happening in the studio that were intriguing me for some reason. And I didn't really know why. I didn't know how I was going to fold that into the final product, but I wanted to photograph it. And that's just what I had been doing right now. So I photographed some failures, learning basic things like, no, you can't slip dip an extremely thin pinch pot into extremely thick slip. It will fall over. I lost a lot of work that way. And continuing to expand my color palette and realizing that I don't like using underglazes straight out of the pint. I think taking from my painting knowledge, colors have more depth when you just mix from the primary colors. So I started just buying the primary colors, and from there, never having a recipe or a ratio of how much red I'm putting or yellow. Just mixing it by eye, so every body of work ends up having like a slightly different, tone to it. If I'm feeling funky, sometimes I'll just throw some oxide in there too, just to spice things up a little bit. But this is where a very weird system starts to approach, and I don't fully understand why I take this approach, and because it doesn't need to be this controlled. But for whatever reason, when it came to decoration, and this is how I do it now, if I have a certain amount of a specific color of transfers, it is my goal to create as much variety within one form as possible. And thinking back on it now, I think it was me trying to create a body of work that had as much information as possible. This way I could see how specific color combinations were working. And I could analyze decisions that were made within parameters, but were made in hopefully something of a spontaneous or playful fashion, and just trying to find a balance between the two. So this is kind of what my system ends up looking like in terms of decoration. So this is what that work ends up looking like. I have a mix between that like cone 8 work and then the cone 6. And this is when I get encouraged to start living with some of the work. And that is huge. I learn a lot, like a lot. And being someone who, at this point, I don't identify as a potter, but I'm very clearly a potter. I make a lot of pots. So in living with the work, I start to really focus on fixing, like evolving the design of an object with a focus on function and comfort. And with the help of my parents, I get the financial support and the confidence to finally try to teach myself screen printing. And this was something that I did because I was just so tired of not really fully achieving the imagery I was looking for. And so with the help of Jason Burnett's screen printing book, I learned how to screen print in my bathroom. And because I'm so scared, I did not do this immediately to all the work. I did this to one plate. And that is this plate right here. And it turned out decent enough for me to later start, implementing it. But when it came to creating screens, I realized I need to pick a color palette. And from my printmaking education, I am used to the CMYK color palette. And to me, it kind of feels like the adult version of the primary colors. So it felt very playful to me. So I played a lot with those 3 colors and then black. And in terms of imagery, I knew I wanted to involve, I wanted a floral element, something that was full of life, but not too lively. I didn't want it to be a little too happy. That's not really my style. I needed something that was very specific. And I had been pressing flowers for a long time before this. And I discovered an incredible resource, which is this Steer Herbarium collection, which is all virtual. And this collection is massive. It's so massive that if you pull it up on your computer, it might crash your computer. It's happened to me twice. It is a huge collection, but it is a phenomenal resource because they have probably every plant specimen you can think of pressed and documented in a way that is so easy to then take into Photoshop and edit. So what I would do sometimes is I would have I ended up having a day where I would just scroll through the herbarium collection, pick my favorite specimens just based on, looking at the way the flower had been pressed and thinking about how that would wrap around an object to be viewed in the round. And then some of these prints, some of these pressed flowers, these specimens didn't actually translate well. So it was just trial and error. But before jumping into full on screen printing, I used the opportunity to play a bit with form. Now dipping my toe into the plate technique I was playing with already, with the pinched walls that I was doing with the drinking vessels, and bringing those 2 together to tackle the very intimidating bowl form. So this is the start of that, which of course I was not very happy with, but I learned a lot. And amongst throwing tons of stuff away, like I always did, which later I get in trouble for that, and I stopped doing that, I promise. But amongst that whole situation, I find something interesting that happens to this pot on the far left, where I throw it on top of an old sculpture that turned out terrible to me. And I just loved how it elevated itself on this piece. And so the following semester, I go in the studio and I start to utilize objects that I've already made to try and create something a bit more intentional that does something similar. And then I enter another Skutt competition, which I end up winning with this piece that is kind of like the completion of this idea that evolved from trash to prototype to final product. And so again, it's another moment where I'm getting some positive feedback for playing in this way. And that, I think that helps push me to do some interesting things in the studio. So I go crazy with the printmaking. Now I'm confident. Now I think, okay, I can successfully wash a screen, so I'm feeling okay. And I start to I start to take the advice of my professor, who's always like, Brianna, you need to learn how to play. You need to learn how to relax and have some fun. So I try desperately. And I am playing with little, like linoleum stamps, and I'm playing with cookie cutters and trying to break from the circle, trying to, maybe even thinking about cutting things up and reassembling them. But the way I'm building at this point is very much constructing a two-dimensional version of what I'm going for, deconstructing that, and then reconstructing it onto a mold. And under all of that pressure, this specific material does something really gorgeous in terms of like folding over itself and creating really lovely line that the slip reacts nicely to. And it's interesting because what's happening with the form is it's very static, and there are a lot of parts happening. And so this slip foundation, like not only dipping, but ladling, I start to really love this part because it creates like a foundation of movement for me. And it kind of, I don't know if it's in my head or what, but it like mentally gets me ready to move forward. I'm going from this like static thing, and I'm introducing it to its next little part of the process. Typically, I print a whole bunch of stuff. I liked the idea of having like sharp geometric forms next to these like really wild looking like floral prints. I thought they complemented each other really well. And these large shapes, these like large blocks of color, for me, they were negative space. They don't really look like that when they're like on the pots. It just looks like I'm trying to fill every single bare spot you can think of. But to me, I see negative space there. And so that provided me moments of like fresh air amongst all the chaos. So this is what that work ends up looking like. And this is before I start putting like slip behind my transfers. So I get I get a lot of depth, which is really nice. You can see right through each layer, which ends up being really beautiful. But it's here where I actually become more attracted to the bottom of my pots and not so much the front, which like the front is the important part here. So it was a little weird to be attracted to the bottoms and not so much the part that I'm like primarily photographing. But I took that knowledge and, I took note of it and I ran with it. I continue to explore the same things, pushing myself slowly. It's usually like a slow crawl. So I play with cutting and putting things back together. I take on the challenge of figuring out how to add a foot, because previously I've wanted a plate that had a nice bowl, because I'm someone who appreciates a plate that will like pull up whatever it is you're eating so you can easily grab it. So I want to consider that when I'm making these forms. And by adding a foot, I can solve this buckling problem. So a lot of elements that I end up adding are to solve problems while maintaining the aesthetic vision and trying to still achieve the form I'm going for. I start to get a little bit more confident and I start to build up, making this like what I end up calling a bloated triangle vase. It's basically the bowl, but building up from that. And this stamping on the rim of this plate is from a favorite tool that I had that broke. And then it became my favorite stamp tool. It's my favorite tool. I love it so much. And so I learned through this little experiment that by stamping these pieces and then introducing them to a whole bunch of pressure, they do a very similar thing to the line in that they soften up and become a lot more subtle. But it's like a beautiful response to like the aggressive pressure I'm putting on these pots. I then start to stain some more. I stain everything from this point on because I learned that by pushing black underglaze into these pots, I really enhance all of the little things that I don't think are as evident without the stain. So by pushing in this black, you get to appreciate the stretch marks and the cosmetic cracks and the areas where maybe the transfer has a little bit of like visual chatter. Like all the things that I love, I get to highlight and pull forward a bit more. And of course, trial and error. I learned about a lot of cracking and bad things that happen. And this is where I try to despite working with just clear glaze to line these pieces, I want to be a bit more intentional about drawing that part of the process into the beginning stages of these pots. So using the same templates I use to construct the pot, I then use to apply wax resist shapes and, glaze in between that. So the end product ends up having only a subtle variation between like a satin finish and a glossy finish that you really can only see in very specific lights. So it's very subtle and requires like a specific, like curious eye. This is what that work ends up looking like. Of course, I hated it, but I love it now. Looking back, I love it. It's just, maybe it wasn't quite what I was going for, but there are definitely some pots here that really, really pushed me to do some different things later on, really pushed me in like the right direction. It was a taste of what I had been seeking for the past 2 years. And that was really exciting. I'm really hard on myself. So I did like the work. It always grows on me. It's just not initially. And that's the tallest piece I ended up producing with a very specific function also. During the break, I get to go to Marfa, Texas. If you're not familiar with Marfa, Marfa is known for its connection to the designer Donald Judd. And it's at Marfa where I start to take pictures of the environment because I'm so attracted to all of the color and the texture here. And when I get home, I start to do the same thing in Denton, which is, I promise you, not nearly as colorful. So I end up photographing a lot of aspects of my everyday environment that to me resemble and symbolize kind of like a sense of hope. These lines in the Denton streets, this is what it looks like when like Texas streets are patched up. So this is a repair job. It's a very like loose repair job, which I think is kind of a beautiful thing. And these patches, it's like you're trying to cover graffiti, but you don't even bother to match the paint to the concrete. And so you end up creating this like beautiful layered canvas that someone will just graffiti over, and it just continues to layer and cake itself. And I get to drive by it like every day. It's kind of a beautiful, like always, it's a show that's always changing. And then, symbols of complete neglect that has gorgeous line, like this very dangerous wire that was huge and was there for 5 years. The 5 years I lived there, that wire just dangled and it was beautiful and scary. And it just, I realized that I was being attracted to all of these acts of neglect, but also preservation. And so like that kind of got the gears turning a bit. And I jump into the studio and I continue to play with some new ideas and old ideas, letting things evolve. I get confident enough to start thinking about taking my current technique and using vertical molds rather than just a plate mold that takes up a surface area. I start playing with ideas of like using found objects as stamps in a way, like creating fossils on these objects. And again, continuing to work with color pattern and composition. Okay, and then these 3 pieces from that previous body of work, they get into the strictly functional Pottery National, which is so exciting. And I just go out on a limb and I ask the school to fund my trip. And like they say yes, which is crazy, but amazing. And it's also not something that it's not something that I thought was a possibility. I come from a big family. We don't get to travel too much. So this was really exciting. And I got to meet a lot of people and see a lot of incredible things. Continuing to take photographs, and I got to bring home some really great pots. I come home, I continue to work, continue to develop that, all of the things that I'm interested in. And again, like that one printed plate, I decide to apply a new thing to an old pot. And I think about how much I love this line, and I just felt it deserved to be in gold. So I think it was really exciting to see this happen, and it got me excited for the future pieces. So these photos are really just images of me continuing to play and develop elements of form, starting to slowly apply some of these images directly into the work, playing with waxing. So here's an image of what all that luster looks like and how it responds differently on the glaze versus on the raw form, which provides like lovely variation. So this is what that work ends up looking like. And you may be thinking, why are you just showing me a ton of mugs, Brianna? You make a lot of mugs. And that's because I get so obsessive sometimes where I like to focus on problems and solving those problems. So if my mug is the problem of the 3 months, that is what I will be tackling. And then, yes, I will burn out on it and I'll decide I'm going to make plates now for 3 months. Maybe I'll get to a point where I'm balanced enough to juggle all of them. But I almost feel like if I'm juggling a bunch of different forms that I think have some like really important problems, then I feel like I'm not dedicating the amount of attention that I want to dedicate to that specific issue. So I have a habit of working on like specific forms in clusters like this. So here's some fun little objects that are a little different. Just making forms for like specific collections I have in my home. Here's some playful prototypes that did not crack and somehow survived the kiln, which are usually, prototypes are usually the most exciting things, but they're usually the things that crack. And then I took that all to like my first little booth. Then I was supposed to graduate, ended up having to take some kind of like psychology course. So I was without a studio until my professor, Brooks Oliver, presented me with an incredible opportunity to take advantage of a work exchange with him. And I got a private studio, which was kind of incredible. And in that solitude, I was able to sit with myself, which was good and bad. I got to ask myself a lot of questions. And here are images of me thinking about form and line, both in my environment and within my process. Doing the same thing with color, texture, and pattern. And this is kind of what the studio always looks like. I'm usually stacking a whole bunch of molds that I have, and my whiteboard looks insane because I felt bad about all the paper I was throwing away. So I started whiteboarding, and it just like every thought I have, I put up here, and I slowly just start making and drawing connections. So here is me developing new techniques, new stamps, new textures, some new forms. Playing with scraps, wanting to, being so engaged with these scraps that I want to start to try to turn them into something so they become a jewelry line at some point. And what I'm calling a plant support, it's not exactly a vase, but it looks great when it's supporting like a dead plant. So there you go. So here are some images of what that process kind of looks like. I start to, this door indentation inspires a new green that I, start to include in the process. Playing with found objects now, more found objects as stamps, like this little piece of a broken pen that I start using on top of like polka dot patterns. And this is when to influence the eye to move around the form, I start to be a bit more direct and I start involving street arrows into the work, so that you have a better idea of where I'm looking. And these are, I at first thought it was a bit too direct, but I think it works. We'll see if I keep it. But here's an image of some of this work. And this is the work that ends up being in my solo show that happens right before I leave. So it's all very colorful, lots of cut forms. This is the first body of work that starts to, that has all of those like found object fossils on the bottom as like a little gift to people who are curious enough to, flip them over or maybe hand wash them with love or something like that. I graduate with my boyfriend Holden. We graduate at the same time, and I have my solo show at the production Pottery studio. My whole family comes out. I get to have all my jewelry displayed. It was very fun. And right before I leave Texas, I have I decided I'm going to do my first workshop. Like, why not? The fantastic staff of Denton Workbench, they pushed me to find the confidence to do this. And I have a really great time, not only teaching my building technique, but teaching my printing technique. Then, before I leave, I get an invitation from the Artstream Nomadic Gallery, and I do a little commission for my boyfriend before we leave. So I produce a couple of new pieces. This plate in particular, I'm excited about. I think it'll influence some new work, inspired by a water meter plate that I used to walk by a lot in Denton. So we hit the road and we end up in California. And I am presented with tons of new textures and incredible line. The way Texas patches asphalt is so different than the way California does. So I'm dealing now with some really interesting geometric patchwork, which is exciting. And then of course, the spray painted language that you'll find across any construction site, which is a language that we're surrounded with, but most of us don't even know how to read. So that's interesting to me. I have an interest in these three colors still. I get into my studio. Of course, I get sick the first week and I'm out and I feel terrible. It happens once a year and it wasn't COVID. It was a less popular, less famous respiratory infection. So I'm out for a week. I get back in and I immediately want to catch up. And I test these three clay bodies. I, of course, look into their shrinkage rate and absorption rate, but I want to test their compatibility. They end up, they're horrible. I hate them, so I move on. But I get another show opportunity and I use that to play with some new ideas, looking back at historical pots again to get some ideas on form, and then from there, try to get something similar with the current forms that I'm, stacking and playing with. Playing again, trying to create new textures. Interested in, instead of darting, how can I create some kind of dent in the form that helps with grip without being a very intentional dart? So when I get into the studio, there's like buckets of wood, like scraps. And so I just think, like, if I push this against this, I think it might do something cool. And it ends up looking like pretty similar to how metal bends, which is, if you look back at like images of form that I collect, a lot of them are actually metal objects. Slip dipping, my favorite. It will hands down always be my favorite part. Trying out some new techniques. Playing with a slightly new plate design, trying to figure out how to get a flat bottom without any warping. This was supposed to be a hollow handle. Now it looks like a spout. I cut my template wrong, so that's kind of interesting. This is what those cups tend to start looking like. I'm trying different techniques for erosion. I'm trying water instead of sanding. This is what that work looks like out of the kiln. Not really happy with the clay bodies, but I'm intrigued by like some of the information I've got in terms of surface and color. And I continue to play. I keep going. This one's fun. I think it's going to be great for bananas. It's cracking really bad, so it'll be for my bananas, no one else, but it's very exciting. Playing with incorporating language, using stencils and thinking about, education and texture and line, trying to draw in all that line that's created on the canvas and bringing that into the foundation of the form. So playing, trying to really like give the piece more volume. I went bigger with molds, so I've made some bigger molds just to try and like get me out of my comfort zone a little. And this is what my area looks like in terms of scraps and textures and textiles. I'm slowly trying to evolve. I'm still working on the comfort of these mugs and weight distribution. This comb creates a wonderful texture, very similar to this brick photo that I had earlier. So I'm playing with that. And that piece at the bottom is hollow. That's why it had 2 holes. Developing that plate mold, still trying to achieve that form right now. Keep playing. That's what I was always told. Keep playing, cut it apart, glue it back together. So here's the current evolution that I'm excited about for this form, giving it a lot more visual lift and volume. I think it's a bit more alert which is exciting. So yeah, this is kind of that like just quick little evolution. So I have a handle that's like really not very comfortable. And I'm trying to get used to making decisions that will result in more comfort. And right now, in terms of the future, I want to keep looking back at these pots and really identifying what I'm interested in and why, and then looking to the images I've collected and to potters right now who have developed techniques for years to achieve the things I'm looking at, and trying to take all of this information and implement it in my own studio. Same with color, trying to remember where the color I love comes from, and texture and color and curated spaces. Where do all of these things live in the outside world? Okay, this was a last minute slide, and I'm going to speed through this because I know I've been talking forever. This is kind of a current, what I think is going to be happening in the future. I have always tried to find a balance between a really loaded composition versus a composition that is a bit more minimal. And I can't seem to shove that into one piece. And so I think I'm going to embrace actually creating two bodies of work and letting those two bodies of work influence each other. So maybe one body of work that is a bit more quiet, and another that is, catering to my louder side, and one that is focused on form and function and craftsmanship, and the other focused more on like self-expression. And then hopefully with time, those things will influence each other. And I'm doing a lot of teaching, which has been really fun. And I get to work in front of the museum, which is a totally, new realm. But yeah, that's it. If you're interested in some techniques, these are like fantastic resources over here to the right. These are books that I really love and reference a lot. But yeah, sorry, that went a little long.
No, all good. Wonderful. Thank you, Brianna.
Yeah.
So we have some time for questions now. Please feel free to either type your question in the chat or use the little raised hand emoji to verbally ask your question. Yeah, so let's see what rolls in.
Well, I don't know the raised hand emoji, but how about it? Hi, Brianna. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think the extent of your exploration is fantastic. Did you decide, you've been using 3 different clays, and you said that they weren't blending together well or working together well?
Yeah, so I'm realizing that when it comes to clay body, I'm attracted more to color than anything. Mm-hmm. So the colors just did not come out very well. They were compatible with each other because of the research I had done in terms of their like chemical makeup, but the colors weren't quite right, and they didn't like my favorite clear glaze, which is like a deal breaker. So
I just migrated my work from earthenware to cone 6.
Oh, nice. That's big.
But I'm having a real problem with the glaze at this moment. So it's 2 months of doing testing for that one. So your new colors and things, you worked those. I was interested in the skin tone image that you showed at the very end. Yeah, is that a source for you?
It's something that I'm wanting to dive into. So it's not something I fully have considered too much in the past. But now I'm starting to really think a bit more about color, because I've spent so much time just loading a single object with tons of color. I think I want to take a more like strategic approach maybe to it, and explore where colors like that live and my personal connection to them. So it's something that I haven't explored quite yet, but it's definitely on my radar right now.
Cool. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Robert. Looks like we have another question that came through the chat. Could you talk a little bit more about the bugs in your work?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I have a pretty like great bug collection, and like recently my mom gifted me a lot for Christmas. So they're so beautiful and they're so fragile, and I want to make I feel like they deserve a display. But for me, because function is so important, that ceramic object cannot just be a platform. It must function in a way that contributes to the bug itself. So those were really just like a personal little thing. I felt bad having them all boxed away. And so I wanted to do something almost as like an act of appreciation. And it was, again, an opportunity to do something out of my wheelhouse. So yeah, it's something that I'm going to continue to explore, but I have quite a variety, and the cicadas in particular they're really, they were for me unique to the Texas landscape.
Mm-hmm. Nice, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Can I just say something?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Bree, sorry I was a little late to the start of this, but I just wanted to say, like, it was a great artist talk. And yeah, it was great to just hear you like recap so much of your story. And, you know, I just have to say you're an incredibly hard worker. And I think that shows just, you know, how far you've come over these past couple of years. And I'm just really excited to see what comes next. And also, I don't know if you've said it, but like you do have work in the Artstream right now. And I think you should plug yourself if you have like sales happening. So maybe that would be something to share with the group.
Good point. Thank you, Brooks. Yes, I have some cups in the Artstream. I think I have 2 available left right now, which is very exciting. I sent a total of 11. So that's really huge. So snag those. I'm hoping I have a next body of work for the AMOCA December sale at like the first week of December. So, but yeah, I got 2 cups left through the Artstream. So check that out.
Excellent.
All righty. So thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us and for your excellent questions. For more of Brianna's work, you can visit her website, briannaferreira.com, which will drop the link. There it is in the chat. If you're in the neighborhood, come visit the museum, Ceramic Studio in Pomona. You can learn more about AMOCA, our ceramic studios and artist in resident program, and our current exhibitions at our website, amoca.org.
Oh, I work on Saturday, y'all. Come see me on Saturdays. I work the front.
And then just a reminder, we're recording this presentation will be available on our website in the next few weeks. So thanks again and see you all soon.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.